We can open our Bibles once again, and we'll read a portion of what we call the Passion, from John 18. We'll begin reading verse 28 of John 18. We'll read into chapter 19, and we'll read the section especially about the Jesus trial before Pilate. John 18, we'll start reading at verse 28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If you were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." And Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. And this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king, then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." And as soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." And from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. And anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "And shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. And finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. That's from the reading of John. Friends and congregation, our culture, really any culture, has a wide range of competing religions, philosophies, systems of thought, ideology. There's many options that we can choose for what to believe in. Well, it's not always easy to sort through it all. What is for sure is that everybody in this world, in every religion, has a sense of justice. We may have different ideas on what justice is, but we don't doubt its importance. Nobody argues that we shouldn't have a court system or that we shouldn't have laws, except for perhaps a tiny minority of anarchists. And if someone were to suggest that justice is not important, all you have to do is punch them in the face and see what they say next. Walk into their house and box up all their possessions and carry them off and see what they say. A strong belief in justice will emerge quickly. I can guarantee it. We believe in justice. People ought to be fair, and wrongdoing ought to be punished. In fact, the war in Ukraine has shown us this. Ukraine has been invaded. Many people have suffered intensely. And now there's calls for justice. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. There's this sense in which something should be done. A wrong must be avenged. The thing we need to realize on Good Friday today is that justice is fundamental to what happened 2,000 years ago on this day. We commemorate the death of Jesus. We mourn the death of Jesus on this day. But as we do so, we need to understand that justice is the core of what's happening on this day. And it absolutely, because of that, has huge bearing on how you think about yourself and about Jesus. Today I want to show you why justice is essential to this, and how this is convicting and yet a beacon of hope. We'll do so under this theme. The king is innocent, yet sentenced to the cross. We'll start with Pilate's trial, and we'll walk through the passage in this section. Of course, when we read the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate, we see an account of that trial. Now, before the trial, Jesus has been taken captive by the Jewish religious leaders. They hated Jesus. They hated everything that Jesus stood for. They've been plotting to kill him for many years. They induced Judas, Jesus' disciple, to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And Judas let them know that Jesus was coming to a garden at night where they were waiting to capture him. And all of Thursday night, before Good Friday, the Jews are staging this nighttime kangaroo court. They have no defensible charge against Jesus other than the fact that they hate him. As far as they're concerned, that's enough. But there's a hitch, you see. For the Jews to really do something to Jesus, they need the permission of the Roman authorities. They are not allowed to kill a man. And in their thinking, this man must die. So, on Friday morning, early in the morning, they bring Jesus to the Roman governor, to the praetorium, they call it. And in a supreme irony, the Jews refuse to enter the building because they, as Jews, cannot touch people who are not Jewish. Otherwise, they, according to their religion, would be ceremonially unclean. The next day, or Friday and Saturday, they're supposed to eat the Passover feast, their great religious festival. And in order to eat the feast, they have to be seen as religiously clean. This is very important. Because right away in the beginning of the tale of Jesus' death, we realize that hypocrisy is at the center. These people are about to do something incredibly hypocritical and unjust. And what we need to realize is that as they do it, is that injustice and bad things are rarely done by bad people being bad. Sometimes that happens. But more often than not, injustice is perpetrated when people do bad things because they think that that bad thing is right. Injustice occurs when we redefine what justice is into something other than what God says it is. The Jews think that being ceremonially clean is more important than murdering an innocent man. In their minds, Jesus needs to die so that they can preserve their religion and the status of their nation. This sense of injustice is not unique to the Jews, you see. Every one of us is vulnerable to this self-delusion. This idea that I determine what's fair and just and no one else. Every one of us lives in this world and we make our own laws. We expect other people to measure up to the laws that we create. And that, in fact, is the process by which most injustice occurs. Think about the Ukraine for a second. Why is Vladimir Putin invading the Ukraine? It's not because he knows he's doing the wrong thing. He thinks he's doing what is right. Ukraine is part of Russia, he says. And since the greatness of Russia is the number one goal in his life, then the Ukraine should join by force. You see? We do things like that. Your life is full of that. And justice is not, in fact, something Vladimir Putin does, but something that you and I do every day. Are we always as fair to our children as we should be? Are we as fair to our spouse, our church, the government? Are our thoughts always just? In fact, it's fair to say that most of us are walking factories of injustice. Which means that the injustice that occurs in the trial of Pilate is in fact something that you are implicated in. If you were there at this scene, and we're about to talk more about it, would you have done anything differently? This is the question I want you to ask yourself. Would you have saved Jesus? Would you have made a different choice than Pontius Pilate? Would you have stayed to suffer with Jesus, unlike his disciples? You see, the thing I want us all to think about this morning is that the trial of Jesus before Pilate is in fact a trial in which humanity is in the dock. And it is a trial in which humanity is convicted because humanity is implicated in convicting and sentencing an innocent man. By finding Jesus guilty, we are declared guilty. And in fact, Jesus is never declared guilty. He is in fact sentenced. Now back to the trial, and I want to follow this thought through the trial. See, in verse 29, the governor comes out to speak to the Jews. The Jews have brought Jesus. He says, okay, what charges are you bringing against this man? What has he done? I mean, he assumes there must be an accusation. The Jews answer. They say, if he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. They do not have a charge. Again, a hallmark of injustice. Might makes right. I'm more powerful than you. Do as I say. Don't ask questions. And Pilate says, okay, that's how you want it to be. Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. Well, I don't need to deal with this. But then the Jews tip their hand. We have no right to execute anyone. We need you to approve our execution. We want to kill him. We don't want to find out if he's innocent. What we want is to kill him. And Pilate then is kind of curious. Well, who is Jesus? Why did the Jews want Jesus dead? This is kind of odd. So he goes in to talk to Jesus, and he asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Nobody's called Jesus a king. Why would he call Jesus a king? Well, remember, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, he entered with a triumphal entry. And all these people had acclaimed Jesus as king. And Pilate had seen that, and he had noted it. He had said, this man is a threat to Rome. So Pilate asks, are you really a king? I mean, Jesus doesn't look like a king. There's no soldiers around him. And Jesus responds, he says, is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? Jesus needs to know what Pilate means with the word king. Why? Well, read on. First, Pilate responds with disdain. Am I a Jew? I don't know what you Jews call a king. I don't know what any of this is about. This is not my problem. And Pilate hates the Jews. The Jews were difficult to rule. They kept revolting. They were never easy for him to rule. You can hear the disdain in his voice. Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done? You must have done something. And Jesus answers. He says, my kingdom, I am a king, but is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So, I am a king, Pilate, but not as you understand it. My kingdom is in fact not from this world, which means I don't have an army and weapons, and I'm not a threat to Rome. Of course, Pilate hears the affirmation of kingship. He says, you are a king. Obviously, you've just said it. And Jesus says again, you say I am a king, but I'm not a king by your definition. Those are your words, not mine. My purpose is not to challenge Rome. And he says, the reason I was born and came into the world is why? Why did Jesus come? To create a rebellion? No. To testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. I was born to proclaim the truth that God is real, that I am God, and that all human beings can be saved if they put their belief in me. And God is actually the ruler over this earth, not Rome or the Jews. My kingdom, however, does not advance through people picking up swords. It advances when the truth is shown to a human heart, which then changes to obey that truth because it's the truth, not because it's forced to change. Right here, Jesus challenges every person who would say that he wants to take over the government. Jesus is not interested in that. Jesus is interested in changing your heart with the truth. He's not interested in creating new political parties or rebellions or protests, perhaps. He is a God who preaches truth. Now, Pilate is very skeptical of Jesus' claim. Like many modern people even today, and certainly many Romans consider themselves modern people, he is skeptical of any person who is too certain of the truth. He says, what is truth? Pilate is confused by Jesus' claims. See, how can Jesus not want the same things Pilate wants? Pilate wants to be more powerful. He wants to be richer. He wants to be promoted in his career. How can Jesus not care about those things? What is truth? Zealot. But Pilate realizes that Jesus is obviously not a threat to him. And so he tries to release Jesus. Most people paint Pilate as a cruel, awful man, and there's some of that. But mostly he's disinterested and neutral. And in so being, he provides a teaching moment, doesn't he? You see, when an innocent man is about to die on a cross, you cannot be neutral. And many people here, in this church and elsewhere, think they can be neutral on Good Friday. Many of us think that we can come to church and Good Friday is for Christians only. The reality is you can't be neutral in this matter. Why not? Why can't I be neutral? Because the evil of the world is too strong. If you think you are going to be neutral to the truth, the evil of the world is going to carry you off and force you into doing things you don't want to do. Our sin is too powerful. The death of Jesus demands that we choose sin or the truth. And Pilate is a perfect example of neutrality ends up with him being a servant of evil. You cannot be neutral. In fact, there's a little more to it. Neutral Pilate has been put into a dilemma created by his own idols, the things that he serves. He wants to release Jesus. He knows that that's the right thing to do. But why doesn't he do the right thing? Because in his heart, he worships himself. He lives for his career, for pleasing the emperor, for his reputation as a governor. And the Jews, if he makes the Jews too angry, they're going to create huge problems and he's going to look bad. And once again, if you serve something other than Jesus, who is the truth and the only good, you will inevitably be dragged into doing things and evil you don't want to do. And if you put yourself first, you will then put the justice others need second. And in this sense, all of us are tempted by that, aren't we? And Pilate attempts to set Jesus free. He's accustomed to release a prisoner at Passover, and he tries to have that prisoner be Jesus. The Jews demand instead this murderer and rebel, Barabbas. And second, he then has Jesus beaten up. This is normal for a crucifixion, but Pilate hopes the Jews will be satisfied with a beating. Maybe if they see Jesus beaten, then they won't want him killed. This is what's happening here. The soldiers, of course, mock Jesus. They put a crown of thorns on his head. They dress him in a purple robe. You can imagine the craven soldier looking at a man who says he's king, and yet the soldier is able to slap him in the face. The irony is supreme. And here we have the Lord of heaven and earth who said he was born to bring the truth, and yet the world slaps him in the face for such a claim. Jesus is a king unlike any other, you see. He's a ruler who allowed himself to suffer injustice rather than come and perpetrate injustice. And third, Pilate tries to pawn Jesus off on the Jewish leaders. He says, you know what, you just take him and crucify him yourself. He hopes that they'll do it without his permission, in which case he can go and claim that they did the wrong thing later. The Jews are way too smart for that. No, Pilate, you must convict him. And fourth, he asserts that there's no basis for a charge. And in fact, he says that 3 times. There's no basis for a charge. There's no basis whatsoever. 3 times. And the Jews do not refute it. In the book of John, the innocence of Jesus is always declared by those who oppose him in an irony. The Jews don't even investigate the charge. They call Jesus the Son of God. And it's fascinating to note here that the judge becomes Jesus' advocate in the most unusual turn of events. In fact, the charge is that Jesus is the Son of God, and this terrifies Pilate. The Romans were highly superstitious people. If you ever read Roman history, there's always talk of bad omens. And every time somebody was killed, they tracked back bad omens that pointed to that person dying. And Pilate's wife sends him a note, and we read this in the other Gospels. She had a bad dream about being involved with Jesus. And Pilate's like, whoa, what am I involved? Maybe this guy is the Son of God. You see, Pilate takes Jesus' charge more seriously than anyone else. He says, where do you come from? Jesus doesn't answer him. Pilate tries to assert his authority. He says, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have the power to free you or crucify you? Don't you want to talk to me? Right? I have power. I'm the one in charge. Do you know that? And Jesus says, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Yes, Pilate, you do have power, but it's not yours. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. I get it, Pilate. You don't want to murder me. The Jews do. They're obviously more sinful, but you have a responsibility. Yes, Pilate, you're right. But Pilate has already cast the dice. He sits down and hands Jesus over. It's the only way to preserve his career, which to him is infinitely more important than discovering the truth about the world. The Jews, of course, play their final card in verse 12. They say, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. And here with this faithful statement, you have the Jewish nation, which refused to bow the knee to any foreign rulers for hundreds of years, gives up in one instant. The high priest says, Caesar is my king. For the Jews, it was an axiom that God was their king. They rejected Jesus in the final moment. So Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified. Jesus, beaten, wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe dripping with blood, is brought outside the city like a common criminal. He's too weak to carry the cross, so they make someone else carry it. Soldiers, while mocking the King of all creation, the light of all men, declared innocent 3 times by the judge at the trial, they nail this man with spikes through his arm to a cross. And then they drive another nail through the bones of his feet. And they raise him up on a cross. The innocent man, where he sags on the nails and creates excruciating pain for himself. There is not a single reason, humanly speaking, why he should be on that cross. But of course, this raises the question, why was he on the cross if indeed he was the Son of God? Our second point, what it means. Why is it so important that we celebrate in Christianity a guy who claims to be God and dies on a cross? I think that to begin answering that question, we need to think about it for a second. We need to really take a look at ourselves. Why did Jesus need to suffer an injustice like that? What was he doing up there? Well, he certainly wasn't up there because it was Pilate's fault. He was up there because of you. You are more like Pilate and the Jews than you would ever dare imagine. How many of us tacitly allow things like the trial of Pilate? We allow injustice to flourish in our lives. Something bad happens to someone, we don't speak up. We have to pay our bills, The boss mistreated that person, well. We see a mob attack another person. Well, we are generally okay with someone else suffering as long as it's not me. We believe in justice except when it's inconvenient for us. And in fact, we perpetrate injustice more often than we would like to admit. Are we always fair with our children? Do our Facebook posts reflect a just view of the world? How about all the unborn babies that die every day of which we do nothing? We take our leisure on vacation while the world burns. See, Jesus' trial, again, as I've said, it convicts you. Because this trial of injustice is not the only trial of injustice. There's trials like this every single day in this world. This whole world is like this. This, in fact, is a reflection of how the world actually is. If the perfect person came down and lived on earth, what would we do to him? And this is the example. But I wouldn't. The disciples ran away. Pilate tried to remain neutral. And the Jews wanted him dead. You fit either one of those three groups. See, humanity is a failure and it is its own worst enemy. Every attempt we have to try create a just society on this earth requires the perpetration of new injustice. Every king that's been risen up eventually does wrong. Every new marriage that's consummated eventually creates new injustice within the marriage. Every church has examples of people that do bad things. Where does it end? Where is the way out of this mess? And this is the hope of the trial of because the trial of Jesus before Pilate is in fact a glimmer of hope. You see, Jesus is the way out. Here we have a man who suffered gross injustice and yet did not complain and did not take any sort of revenge and suffered it. Here's a man who would rather die than use one iota of injustice and force in anger. Here is a man who is so set on truth and love that he will only use words and love to change another person instead of force. Isaiah 53 verse 7, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? None of us were able to do what he did, except if we live with him in our hearts. The thing you need to understand is that it's even greater than that. The scriptures make it clear that this scene was the will of God. This was not an accident, nor was it outside of God's control. In fact, God used the evil of Pilate and the Jews so that his will would be done. Why? Isaiah 53 verse 5. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Why? You see, God is perfectly just, right? Jesus demonstrated that while he was on earth. But man is sinful, unjust, unworthy, fickle, selfish, because man sinned against God by choosing rebellion against God instead of life with him. And since God is holy and perfectly just, he should have destroyed man the instant man chose sin instead of life with God. But God did not do that. Why? Why didn't God destroy you? I mean, wouldn't we all, think about it, wouldn't we all want God to be completely committed to getting rid of any sin and pain and injustice? Isn't that what you want? That's what people claim they want. But if that's the case, then he should get rid of you. You perpetrate injustice. You are the problem. But God chose not to destroy us. In fact, we're sitting here in a building and the sun is shining on us. We're breathing God's air. He hasn't destroyed us. Why? He should. There can be no perfect eternity without the destruction of sin. And so we got to get rid of it. No. God didn't destroy us because he decided to save us instead. But in order to save us, he had to satisfy his perfect justice, because wrath lays upon all sin. And he decided to send Jesus to take the wrath instead of you. And Jesus became a human being. He represented the whole human race. The wrath of God fell upon him, so that now there's no wrath on me, and now I can now be restored to know God again. That's why the trial of Pilate is so important. Because when Jesus was condemned, we were condemned. And by being innocent, he showed that, in fact, because he survived the trial as an innocent man, therefore, his innocence can then cover us so that we can go to the trial at the final day when Jesus returns to judge all of humanity. And at that trial, we will be declared innocent and be sentenced to eternity with God instead of the cross. The trial of Pilate is a precursor to that final judgment. The wrong thing happened that time, but by Jesus' willingness to endure it, it shows that next time the right thing will happen. So, in a world full of injustice and pain, where do you find hope? Right here. Here's a man who would rather die than do one single act of injustice to you. Here's a man who died so that on the final day, things would be unfair. Because what's fair at the judgment, the final judgment of God, is that we all die. But instead of being fair, God has decided to be gracious. And because he's gracious, on the final day we will instead enjoy the innocence of Jesus before God, and therefore the present of life eternal, instead of what we actually deserve. Praise God for being gracefully unfair to you. Whenever you struggle with the injustice of this world, remember that God forgives your injustice, and that he is the answer, and he is full of grace for all of those who come to him. How full of grace is he? So full that he's willing to die on a cross to ensure that he can love you. That's how full of grace he is. And today, that's what we celebrate. As mournful as this day is, it is a day of triumph, because Jesus then rises from the dead on Easter morning. Amen.